Hi guys, Julia here from JM Squared Vintage. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I am here with something a little bit different. Now, I don't know about you, but I know that I have certainly been guilty of some of these things. Today, we are going to talk about the 7 deadly sins of reselling. Any one of these sins can be costing you money. So let's break down these 7 deadly sins and figure out what we can be doing to make sure that we are avoiding them. But before we get started here, guys, if this is your first time here, if this is your first time stumbling on my channel, first and foremost, welcome. I am Julia. That is my name. We talk all things thrifting and vintage and the business of reselling on the internet here. If that sounds like something that you might be into, consider hitting subscribe down below. I would love to have you along on this journey. But without further ado, guys, we've got a lot of introspection to do today. So why don't you go grab your notebook, grab yourself a snack, grab yourself a drink. You know I've got my matcha latte. So let's sit back, relax, and let's break down these 7 deadly sins. Before we jump in, guys, I do want to take a quick minute to thank Vendu, my ride or die, for partnering with me on this video. Vendu basically serves as the hub of my entire reselling business. Its cross-listing function allows me to write my listings just one time and list them on any one of the marketplaces that they are integrated with. And they are integrated with pretty much every marketplace you want to be on. I'm talking Poshmark, Depop, eBay, Shopify, Etsy, Vinted, Vestiaire, Grail, and even Whatnot. So once I write that listing, it is literally only about 20 seconds to go through and cross-list it on all the different marketplaces. Absolute game changer. But they're constantly adding new features that help make our lives as resellers a lot less stressful. They take so much busy work off the plate. One of their pro features is their automatic offers to likers feature, where you can set it up so that if a like comes through on a specific item, on a specific marketplace, within a reasonable amount of time, you can automatically send an offer to that liker. That way you don't have to babysit your marketplaces, you don't have to babysit your phone to see who's liked what when, right? Like it's all done without you even thinking about it. They also have marketplace sharing and refreshing, and I'm not even talking about all the features that they have that help you manage large inventories without getting completely overwhelmed. Bulk edit, bulk import, you name it, they've got you covered. So guys, when I say that Vendu is literally the backbone of my business, I mean it. I literally run my entire business out of there. All my inventory runs through, it serves as my central inventory repository, keeps everything nice and tidy, and it allows me to go out and do the things that I need to do instead of sitting here babysitting my laptop and my phone. So if you are interested in giving Vendu a try, click the link in the description box down below and take 25% off of your first month. If you love it, be sure to sign up for the annual plan, because with the annual plan, you get 2 months per year free, and you get access to all the pro tools at no additional cost. As I've said before, and I will say again, you will wonder why you haven't done it sooner. Now, back to the video. So let's be honest, guys, we have all been guilty of at least one of these sins, myself included. Maybe you've priced something too high because you just knew it was special. Or maybe you are staring down a death pile in the corner of your room that's starting to resemble Jabba the Hutt. Today, let's break down some of the habits that are silently destroying your profits, and let's figure out how to fix them. So the first sin, pride. I just mentioned it, and this is probably the one that I'm the most guilty of. You're pricing your items too high. It's something that I've really had to train myself out of, especially when I get to these special vintage pieces. So this can be a result of a few things. Number one, it can be something, if you're reselling something that you've paid for yourself, like say you bought a formal dress and now you want to resell it. People will have an inflated vision of what something will be worth because of what they paid for it. This is like the old story that you hear about people who lovingly restore cars. They always want to get the same amount of money out of a restored car that they put into it, but that never ever happens, right? And the same can be said about secondhand fashion, right? You find yourself a dress that was $1,000 at the thrift store, and there are some people who use a formula. So they say, okay, whatever the retail price is, I'm going to charge whatever 50% for it. And while that will work for some items, but for most items, especially in the high-end world, that is not at all going to be the case. So when it comes to pricing, typically what you've got to do is you've got to search sold comps, not for sale items. I constantly have people saying oh, I see this. There's one selling for $300 on eBay. Yeah, you can ask whatever you want for something. It doesn't mean that somebody's going to pay that. You have to look at the sold prices. I strongly recommend you lean on that. Now, for me, how I end up pricing my items is I go and I look at sold comps and I pick kind of a target price. So say sold comps are between $25 and $50. I'm going to aim to get between $35 and $40 for that, right? Like right in the middle of that sold comp range. So I'll take the high end of my target range, so that $35 to $40, and then I'll add 30% to allow for some negotiation. I know pricing can be one of those things that really trips people up, especially in the beginning before you get the hang of it. So that's my formula. And obviously there are exceptions to the rule, and that's, with everything, but that is how I do it. So hopefully that helps you. Now, the emotional side of pricing is a different beast, right? Now you're probably getting into something that has sentimental value to you, or it's a particular kind of vintage that you absolutely love. Same deal. You really have to go by what people are paying for those items. If you have storage facilities where you can price things at what you want to price them for and wait for the right buyer at the right time, that is great. That being said, I know that that is not the reality for most of us. So it can be a little bit tricky to price vintage items. So you really have to kind of look at everything like in that same range. So say you find a 1950s silk shirtwaist dress. Gorgeous. You're probably not going to find the exact same dress. It's just a lot of those things back in the day were handmade by people, or, you went to the local dress shop and they made it for you, or the tag's gone, or whatever the case may be. So you'll just have to look at other, 1950s silk shirtwaist dresses and see what they're selling for and see what the different factors are that are making them sell. Maybe one sold for $1,500, but it's Christian Dior and it had a very iconic like design that he did, whatever. Don't take that into consideration if your dress is not Christian Dior, but see if you can find that happy medium of other 1950s silk shirtwaist dresses and do the same thing. Find your target price in that range, be realistic, and then add your 30% to allow for negotiation. It's been pretty foolproof for me. And honestly, like the more you do this, the easier this becomes. But the big thing to remember is that the market does not care what you think and how you feel about an item. The market cares what people are willing to pay for it. So you really do have to detach your emotions from the items that you're selling, at least in terms of price expectancy, because I will never not get emotionally attached to my vintage pieces. That's just who I am, and that's never going to happen. I love my vintage treasures, but price-wise, I'm pretty emotionally detached. So price with your data, not with your ego, not with your emotions, and remember that cash flow is king. Profit today beats potential someday. All right, next up on the sins list, we're going to be talking about sloth, and I feel like all of you are starting to get uncomfortable and glancing over at that pile in the corner, right? We're going to be talking about your death pile. The bottom line here is that if it's not listed, it's not going to sell. Seems simple, I get it, but it is a very mental thing that as resellers we have to talk about. Because a lot of us got into reselling because we loved thrifting. We loved the thrill of the treasure hunt. So when it comes to your work, you're kind of divided into these two pockets, right? Like thrifting feels exciting and it feels like the hobby that we get paid to do. But then when it comes to listing, that feels like work. And that is a big mental divide. If it helps, and I know that this seems like a little bit dire, but for some people that is what they need. They need to reframe this situation in a way that will light a flame under them. Honestly, if you have piles sitting there unphotographed, unlisted, that is frozen profit, which is technically debt in disguise. At this moment right now, you are in debt on that inventory. That little shift in a mindset might help get you moving a little bit better. That being said, you still have this kind of mental block of this is the fun and this is the work. Here's how I deal with this, because this is 100% how my brain is divided on my work. I'm very, very structured with it. And I always recommend that people be structured with the harder parts of their work. Get them done either at a scheduled time or get them done first thing in the morning. So you just always know that that time is kind of dedicated to get a chunk of the stuff that you don't like to do off the table. If you're sitting there kind of at ground zero and you've got hundreds of items sitting in a pile and you don't even know where to get started, just start and say, all right, today I'm going to photograph 20 items. Break it up into small bite-sized chunks, just a little by a little, right? So for me, because I film all of my thrift hauls and my bins hauls, I'm pretty structured in the sense of I get the stuff home, I check it into my inventory, I film the haul, I do all the prep, do the laundry, do the stain removal, do the steaming, I photograph everything in one haul together. I just kind of block a specific day. So for me, my structure comes in order. For you, it might be like, okay, well, Tuesday, your kids are at preschool. That's going to be the day that you photograph. However it works for your schedule, but make it a schedule, make it kind of a set procedure. And then when it comes to listing, a lot of people sit there and be like, I have 400 things that I need to list. It's too much. And you go into like analysis paralysis, which is totally normal. That is your brain just kind of protecting you from complete overwhelm. But if you sit there and you say, okay, I'm going to list 10 items today. I'm going to list 10 items tomorrow. So for me, I'll either do it while I'm sitting having my first cup of matcha in the morning, and it's just something I bang out before I start the rest of my work, or I'll do it at night, kind of when I'm sitting watching TV. I'll put on an episode of The Great British Bake Off, which if you're not watching that, you should totally be watching that. It is a bonbon of a television show. But I'll put something like that on and I'll just kind of be doing my listing in the background. So that's how I work it. But the bottom line is you have got to get those things listed, because again, at this moment, the items that you are staring down, you are in debt on. It feels crazy to look at it that way, but it is absolutely positively what it is. You are in debt on those items until you have them listed and have them sold. So yeah, get your items listed, bite-sized chunks, and just remember, if it's not listed, it doesn't exist. Like, people cannot buy what they cannot see. So make yourself a plan, figure out what works for your schedule, and start tackling that death pile. I'm talking to you and also me. All right, the next sin we're going to hit here is greed. And under greed, I'm going to talk about overvaluing your gross and undervaluing your net. If you are unfamiliar with those terms, that is your gross profit, which is the total sales, basically, and then your net profit is your total sales minus costs. I see this a lot. I see this on videos. I see this a ton on like TikTok, like, look how much I've sold today, blah, blah, blah. But they're not talking about what they sourced for. I always try to talk about what I source for, just to give you guys a realistic picture of what profit looks like for somebody like me who does this full time. I see this a lot on social media. You have a lot of people kind of bragging about, the luxury bags and stuff like this, and they're really kind of chasing that clout in the reseller world. But we're not necessarily seeing what they are paying for those bags. They might be buying them for $4,900 and selling them for $5,200. Honestly, after fees, they're at a loss on that sale, but they got the clicks and they might have gotten that back end. As real life resellers, we really have to be laser focused on making sure that our costs are in line with what we want to be making per item, what your desired profit margin is. Again, like pretty much everything in what we do, other than the freewheeling sourcing part that's so fun, I really recommend that you put structure to this. So I live in LA, and if there's one thing to know about LA, it's that the estate sale scene here is unbelievable. There will be estates full of couture designers, full of vintage costumes, and every time I go to them, there's always resellers right up at the front of the line. And like, respect, man, I respect the hustle. I really do. But the fact of the matter is, if you're going to an estate sale on day one to get all the best goodies, you're going to be paying the highest price for those items. And a lot of times on the resale market, there's not a ton of margin there. So you can be there and be dazzled by beautiful beaded vintage Bob Mackie. But if they're charging $350 for it and you're only going to get $400 for it on the resale market, it's not going to be a smart buy. So it's really all about, before every purchase that you make, and I'm talking about the purchases that you are making strictly for reselling. If you're out there looking for a gorgeous gown to wear to a gala with the eyes of being able to resell it later, that's a different beast. Then by all means, pay that $350 and then get your money back on the resale market after you're done with it. In use until sold is a perfectly acceptable status as long as you take good care of your items, right? So really, when you walk into these situations, especially if you're walking into a place that's like kind of an unfamiliar way of sourcing, maybe you're going to a sample sale, or again, an estate sale, or a big church rummage sale where things are going to be priced kind of all over the place. You just really have to be ready to like set aside the excitement of finding what you found and make sure that the profit is there for you. The other piece of this can be something that you're buying because it's an investment. Think Chanel bags, Hermes bags. History has shown that they are an investment. They do go up in value, but this is probably not the place. If you don't have $5,000 floating around with which you can go and buy a vintage Chanel bag, this is not the place you should be investing. You know what I'm saying? Like, something could physically happen to it. It could get stained. It could get cut, whatever. Unless you have that kind of money, like as play money, this should really not be your primary source of investment. The other thing to be really conscious of here is that you are not overextending your capital to kind of like chase the high of sourcing, right? So for me, I tend to go into places where I have a pretty good idea of what I'll end up spending with a little bit of leg room, right? Like years ago, I went to a little, I think it was a Goodwill store. It was very, very small. And they had two Gucci pieces. There was a blazer and a sweater. And they were $60 a piece. Now, this is more than I typically spend in an entire thrift haul. So I know what Gucci pieces are worth. I didn't have an authenticator there, of course, but the quality was like unbelievable. So I knew that that was going to be a good investment. But it was also not outside of the realm that I kind of leave for slush if I find something really spectacular while I'm thrifting. If I was there and I saw something that was $500, that's outside of my slush window. So it's something that I would really have to strongly consider to free up that capital. But other than that, I really have a pretty tight cap on what I spend on my sourcing, with a margin of error that is pretty finite, with only rare exceptions. If you are outsourcing in all different places and all of a sudden you've dropped $1,200 in sourcing this week, that can be a problem, and that can really put some unnecessary financial stress on you, especially if you are new and getting started and you're not quite in your groove with how you're sourcing and what you're spending on sourcing. I know early on, I absolutely did this. I know that there were times when I went to the thrift store and I've spent $300, which is outside of my normal range by a long shot still, and I lived and I learned. But for me, I go out sourcing with a really strict structure in terms of what I will spend, what I will go above that spend, and what I will go above that spend for. So I recommend you figure out the same structure, especially if you're early on. I would recommend starting small and really building up as you learn what works for you. Whatever you do, just make sure that you're never in a situation where you're going out and you're blowing a ton of money sourcing inventory in a way that's going to put a direct financial stress on you until you sell it. Are you noticing a theme here? It's all about structure to make sure that our businesses move forward. So just remember, you cannot deposit your gross sales. Make sure that your costs are in check. So the next sin we are going to tackle is envy. And that's really going to be about copying what other sellers are doing instead of kind of figuring out your own lane. I have 150% been guilty of this, and I'm sure all of us have at one point or another. But, you see somebody absolutely killing it with Y2K stuff, or you see somebody really making tons of money selling streetwear or vintage t-shirts. So you kind of jump in and try to do that instead of figuring out what works for you, right? You're always going to do best when you are operating in stuff that appeals to you. I know that there are things that I pick up that I am in no way excited about listing, and those things never go well for me. So I've kind of figured out the stuff that I like to source. I like to find, weird and well-made stuff. I love vintage stuff. I like classic well-made women's wear, classic well-made men's wear, and that's my lane, and that's what works for me. And I remember a couple years ago, I was like, oh my God, these vintage t-shirts are going for crazy amounts. So I'm like, let me go and find some vintage t-shirts. And it was just, I hated it. It's not something that I personally am into. And when you're getting into something like vintage t-shirts, it's something you really have to have a pretty deep breadth of knowledge about. There are certain screen printers that people prefer. There are certain companies that people prefer, whatever. You really have to have a beat on that. And there's a reason I refer to them as the bins bros where I go. There's a reason that the guys that are really into that are absolutely crushing that sector of reselling. It's because they're into it. They're living it. Every single one of them is wearing a 1992 Metallica tour t-shirt or, a 1996 Monster Jam shirt. Like that's the way that they live. That's their world. So they know what they're looking for and they know how to spot it. And this can be something that's very easy to get into. You know, I talk about things that I pick up that like some people wouldn't. Like I will pick up good quality like bras and stuff like that. It might not be for everybody, but I'm going to tell you about my experience so you can figure out if it is something that might be good for you. That's how I hope all my stuff comes across. But the bottom line is each and every reselling business, my business, your friends' businesses, whatever, is unique. It starts with kind of what resonates with us, right? Like I sell the stuff that I'm into the best, right? Like that's just how that's always going to work. And then you add into that, there's like location factors, there's budget factors, there's storage factors, there's all other means of things that go into what makes a specific business work the way it does. So if you are chasing, say, my business, it's not going to look the same because you are sourcing in a different place. Maybe you have a warehouse that you have to fill, right? Like I'm very selective with what I pick up. I don't pick up a ton of bread and butter stuff. I'm not picking up like American Eagle or whatever for the most part. I have the opportunity being here in LA to find really like unique and well-made pieces, but that's not available all over this country, right? Like maybe in New York, maybe around the big cities. And sure, you're going to find a piece or two here or there in pretty much every thrift store. That's a real factor in the composition of my business. So what you have available to you, what you're into, all that kind of stuff should be the foundation on which you build your business. I always say, watch your favorite resellers, take what resonates with you, throw away the rest. Because at the end of the day, your business is unique and should be treated as the unique business that it is. All right, the next sin we are going to talk about is gluttony. And that is all about you are buying cheap instead of buying smart. Every single one of us has been guilty of this. Most of us did this at some point early on in running our reselling businesses, but it's something I want to make sure that you are aware of, right? You want to make sure that you are taking in consideration the entire process, right? Like profit is not just what you are paying for an item and what you are selling it for. There's a lot of factors that go into those costs, and it's not just what you are paying the thrift store or what you are paying the person at the yard sale. One of the things I will ask people, and anybody in my life will confirm to the fact that I have said this to them probably multiple times, what is your hourly rate? You need to give yourself an hourly rate to effectively make good decisions when it comes to what you are sourcing. The best example I have for this is changing your oil. Most people, if push comes to shove, could change their own oil. And if you've been doing this for your whole life and you've got all the tools on hand, you could probably do it in 2 hours or so in your driveway. That's if you're really good, you're familiar with how to do it, you've got all the tools already, you've got all the supplies, and you don't mind making 2 trips to the auto supply store to get the oil and then to dispose of the oil, right? Like, what is your hourly rate? I can't give the mechanics money fast enough to change my oil, because when you take into consideration your hourly rate, that is a screaming deal. I use my hourly rate for so many decisions in my life, whether or not I'm going to hire a professional to do something or I'm going to do it myself, right? Like that is how I always think. And you should be thinking the same way with your business. So say you go and you find some American Eagle tank tops. Now these retailed for $14.99, say. On the resale market, they're probably not going to go for much more than $7, right? But if you're getting it for 30 cents, it can seem really, really desirable. And if that is the kind of business you want to build high volume, low margin, go for it. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So it's something you really have to go into eyes wide shut. Supermarkets can run on razor thin margins because you're walking into their store and you're buying 100 items. Amazon can do that because you're buying all of your household goods from them throughout the year, right? Like they operate on high volume, low margins, but they do that because they kind of have a monopoly on that area of your shopping, right? As a reseller, unless you have really dedicated buyers that are only buying their clothes from you, it's not the same play. So if you buy that tank top because you got it for 30 cents, super, super cheap, sure, you can make a good return on investment there, but is the profit going to be worth the effort that it's going to take, for you to purchase it, carry it home, clean it, steam it, store it, list it, ship it? Chances are probably not. When you factor in like what you're paying yourself, it's probably not going to be worth the squeeze. So try, if you're outsourcing, to not be completely blinded by things being absolutely dirt cheap. You still want to be thinking about what you can get for these items. Is the juice going to be worth the squeeze? Is it going to be worth your hourly rate to put in the effort that it takes to sell it? As much as I'd like us all to be as profitable as like Kroger or Amazon, the reality is most of us are working for ourselves or have small teams. So we really, really, really have to be buying smart, buying the right inventory that will move and give us enough profit to justify the work that goes into selling that particular item. In all of life, your time is the most expensive and precious thing that you have. So spend it on items that deserve it. All right. Sin number 6, and it's wrath. So this is one I see a ton, and I've been seeing a real uptick in it recently, and that is just letting negativity and burnout drive your decisions. So the economy's been a bit of a wild ride in the last year. I'm filming this in November of 2025. So if you're seeing this 2 years down the road, just think back to where we were in 2025. So people have really been like wheeling in their spending. Now, as resellers, this is actually a great opportunity for us. I would love to see more of the market shift to buying secondhand and investing in circular fashion. But, at the end of the day right now, people are worried about how they're going to like buy their groceries. But you see a lot, if you are on any kind of social groups of resellers, like the amount of people that are like, it's so slow, I'm closing up my shop. I see that at least once or twice a day. There are ebbs and flows in this business. Any kind of business that you undertake that isn't being paid like a W-2 paycheck salary, there are going to be feast and famine periods. If you're smart with your money and you're smart with your spending and you have that kind of ebb and flow in mind with everything that you do, you will weather all storms. Like we all feel it, right? Like we've all had those days. I'll have 10 sales one day, 6 sales the next day, 9 sales the next day, and then I'll have 3 days of no sales. And you feel your brain starting to spiral, right? Like everybody feels it. Every single person, you, me, every reseller you follow on YouTube, every single one of us has had one of those overreaction moments. But the important thing is to kind of keep yourself in check with that and not letting the negativity get with you, right? Consistency will always win out. So try to be aware of when you start to approach that place mentally. A lot of people, when they get there, they start to like source impulsively. They'll throw a ton of money at advertising. They'll price emotionally, or they'll just be like glued to their phone and checking their apps, constantly. We have all done this. We have all absolutely done this or fought the impulses to do this. But remember that the algorithm loves consistency. So even on those days where it's really slow, like if you need to set boundaries with yourself to kind of cut out screen time at a certain point of the day, do that. And try to look at larger trends. Like try not to look at like what's happening the last 7 days, because that can be terrifying. And that's with any business ever, right? Like if you look at a 7-day snapshot, that's not going to give you a full picture of how successful the business is. Really try to track your success over months. If you're seeing a long trend of descent and you're not doing anything different, maybe try to take this as a little bit of feedback versus frustration, right? Maybe you haven't been removing the background on your photos and you're seeing more and more sellers using background removers on their photos, so yours are sticking out in a bad way. Maybe you take this as an opportunity to say, hey, this is something that I could change that might make my listings a little bit more appealing. So you go through and you remove the backgrounds on your cover pictures, whatever it is. Try to be aware of it when you start to feel those urges and head them off at the pass. Say, all right, I'm starting to feel a little crazy. It's really, really slow this weekend. I need to stop checking my phone. Like put it down, get one of those little bricks, whatever it is that you need to do. But try not to let negativity or burnout drive your decision making. Again, standardize your practices, right? Like Rome wasn't built in a day. Your business will not be built in a day, right? So your bite-sized chunks of listing, your bite-sized chunks of photographing, whatever it is that you have structured out, just keep on with that, right? Like if you have those things structured, it's not a surprise, right? Like you're not going to be sitting there trying to list 100 items in a day when you haven't had sales in 3 days, right? That's a toxic combination right there. So if you just, if you have your set schedule that you do every day, just keep doing it. Consistency will always win. And remember, you may be having thoughts that, reselling is oversaturated. Like many people will start, few people will be consistent. So the way that you rise to the top there is to be consistent. But above all, when you are seeing these kind of downturns, when you're seeing the ebbs and flows, and you're in kind of one of those ebb periods, which we all have, every single one of us has, do not take it personally, take it professionally. Use it as an opportunity to see what you can improve in your listings. But above all, set your boundaries and do your best to plan for these ebb and flow periods, because you know that that is going to be a thing in the reselling economy. All right, and finally, we have reached the end of the 7 deadly sins, and right now we are going to talk about lust. When I'm talking about lust and reselling, I am talking about chasing every new trend, chasing every new thing. I'm all about watching the reselling ecosystem, what new apps are coming in, what's happening, ups and downs. Let's watch the trends. But at the end of the day, if I were to chase every new marketplace that popped up, or if I was to chase every new trend that popped up, I would be completely disjointed. A perfect example of that for me personally is live selling and Whatnot. Poshmark came in super hard with pushing the live shows. Whatnot was starting to boom, and it's a great platform. Like, it's super fun for people who are into it. I have a couple of friends who are really killing it in Whatnot. Shout out to the Opal Hanger. But I really took a look at it and decided that it wasn't for me. Despite the fact that it is a huge trend that is happening right now, people are loving it. Maybe it's something that I look at down the road, but in terms of my workflow and what I do and what I like to do and how I like to do it, it just didn't fit in. So what happens when you try to chase every new trend is that you end up with these like half-finished systems. Nothing gets the attention that it deserves because your attention is split over multiple different things. Diluting your focus only harms the things that you're doing. For me, if I were to go on and do live sales, I know that the place that would get hit the hardest would be my YouTube channel. And that's something that I really feel strongly about. I love the fact that I'm able to create a little bit of community here and maybe help you guys out a little bit one way or another. I have a ton of fun with it, and it's something that I care about deeply. So I know if I were to go in and start doing Whatnot shows, this would suffer, and that's not a trade-off that I'm willing to make. So anytime you see a new trend, a new marketplace, a new selling feature, don't ever feel like you need to jump on it to stay relevant. You know, think about how hard Poshmark was pushing the live shows. And I feel like they've really pulled back on pushing that because they've gotten a lot of pushback on it. I think a lot of their casual shoppers are not interested in that kind of selling. If people are into that kind of selling, for the most part, I think that they're going over to Whatnot, because that is what Whatnot does and that's what they do best. But, you know, if we all just jumped ship and started doing Poshmark live shows, the closet marketplace would have suffered more than it already did. So what I do is I kind of set like a quarterly assessment of what's working for me. Is there a way that I can, add something new in a way that won't cannibalize what I already have going on? Is this new thing something that I think will add revenue without completely overloading me? Or is it something that will add noise, right? So again, I keep that structure in terms of like my quarterly assessments of what marketplaces am I selling on? Is there a way that I can sell on more? Should I be looking at live selling? You think about something like Whatnot versus closet sales. It's a completely different profit structure. It's a completely different workflow. So it's something that just wouldn't work with what I do. And I recommend that you do the same. I know not everybody out there is doing YouTube, but maybe you've got kids. Maybe this is your side hustle, whatever it is. Just make sure that you are taking the time to really sit and think about everything you're doing, making sure that it is adding to your bottom line and not detracting. Maybe you do it once a year and you really take a look at your workflow, what you're doing, and think about, is there a way to improve it? And I'm just saying, if you are only selling on one marketplace, adding more marketplaces is a really low barrier to entry as long as you're using a cross-lister. Even though this video is sponsored by Vendu, this is not part of the Vendu ad, but it bears repeating. It does make adding closet marketplaces very, very easy. But at the end of the day, guys, when it comes to chasing the new things, discipline and focus is the most underrated growth hack in all of reselling, and really in business in general. You rarely see a business of any size be successful by chasing every single trend without really considering the costs involved in doing so. As always, make those decisions with your business sense. But guys, that is it. Those are the 7 deadly sins of reselling. I know that I have 100% been guilty of some of them. I'm sure every single one of you has also been guilty of it. But by keeping our focus, thinking with our business brains, and maintaining a structure to help us get through the hard stuff in running a business, we can all achieve the growth that we want in a sustainable way. But guys, I hope this helped you. If it did, please consider leaving a like or a comment on this video. Of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. I would love to have you along on this journey. Of course, if you're interested in giving Vendu a try, don't forget to click the link down in the description down below. Thanks to them again for sponsoring this video. But without further ado, guys, I hope you have the most beautiful week. Happy hunting, and I will see you all in the next one.